I'm Kathy, and because of my work as a legal nurse consultant and nurse expert over these past 25 plus years, I've come across many nursing cases that have to do with criminal aspects. It's not just negligence, it now goes into criminal. So I put together this webinar so that you can learn how to prevent such things from happening to you and to just be aware of them, that some things can go from negligence into a criminal element. Okay? I hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to Criminal Liability for Nursing Errors and Incidents. I'm Kathleen Martin, and many of you have already come to some of my webinars already, and this is just my conflict of interest disclosure. So I don't have any relationship with any products or vendors or anything. But I just want to state here that when I refer to he or she in this program, I mean both, and I don't mean one or the other. And a little bit about me. I'm a per diem wound nurse in Scottsdale. I work still in K. Martin Consulting, which is a company that I started about 25 plus years ago. I consult for plaintiff and defense attorneys on negligence cases nationwide. I also have a company called Legal Nurse Pro, and I teach nurses an online course in how to be an LNC, of which I am. I'm also a licensed nursing home care administrator, and I maintain that. I'm certified in quality management and wound care. Some of the past positions I've had are way back in the olden days: critical care nurse, open heart surgery, neurosurgery, and critical care in that area. I've been a hospital director in various departments in both New Jersey and New York. I was a quality management vice president in a New York hospital. I've been an administrator, CEO in nursing homes and long-term care subacute facilities and rehab. I've been a director of nursing in both hospital and nursing facilities. And this is just if you want to look in a little bit more detail about me. So what we're going to accomplish today in this webinar is we're going to discuss differences between negligence, medical malpractice, gross negligence, and criminal law as it applies to negligence cases. We're going to discuss criminal liability for medical errors, wounds, and other areas. Identify challenges for safe nursing practice, discuss high-risk areas for medical errors, and learn best practices to promote a just culture. So some of the background here in criminal responsibility for carelessness, it's been very controversial over the years as to its fairness, its justness. So there's still controversy and debates about it. But common areas of medical criminality, and by medical I mean nursing as well, but it's combined. Improper dispensing of prescriptions and drug diversion, Medicaid, Medicare fraud, Social Security fraud, insurance fraud, overbilling or improper billing, false medical claims, medically unnecessary treatment, and improper coding practices. Some other common areas of nursing criminality are medical errors, IV errors, failing to report an error or incident, ignoring the patient when an incident or mistake occurs, and failing to monitor. And we'll talk about some cases related to that. It's kind of having an intentionality that is the difference with a civil complaint of negligence with criminal. Criminal is more intentional. You're aware that you're hiding something or doing something that isn't correct. So that's basically the difference. Criminal charges. Serious errors can gain attention through the media. So nurses being arrested for criminal intent regarding a failure in patient care is on the rise. We see more of these stories in the news and media. Of course, it's not just happening to nurses, but to physicians, pharmacists, and sometimes even nursing assistants. When CNAs are named, it is usually due to actual abuse. That's usually their area where they get called in. Here are just a few fairly recent actual news headlines reporting on nurses arrested for criminal activity or incidents. These are from actual news outlets like the New York Times that I plucked and typed them on here, okay? So we see names: Michael Gusti, defending nurse charged with murder. Another nurse prosecuted for the death of a patient. How was a nurse able to kill 8 seniors over a decade? So it's fairly infrequent, but it's out there. So here's a few terms that you should know. So homicide and murder are sometimes used interchangeably. Homicide is not necessarily murder and not necessarily criminal. Homicide can be justifiable, as in self-defense or the defense of others. So under homicide is negligent homicide or manslaughter. The cases we are talking about here have to do with carelessness and mistakes, and not someone who set out to murder someone. This is not just a mistake, it's bumped up to criminal behavior. There is no attention by the authorities to look at system issues in an organization. A DUI which results in the death of another person is an example of negligent homicide and involuntary manslaughter.
When an incident with a patient care occurs, the first step in the criminal process is an investigation. The authorities may become involved because of a mandatory reporting obligation on the part of the hospital when a patient is injured, or because of reports made by the patient or family. In most jurisdictions, either a judge in a preliminary hearing or a grand jury must indict the defendant before charges can be brought. I review a lot of cases in various states, and some states require that everything is reported to the police, if you could believe that. So that's how this type of thing could spiral out of control and go into a criminal charge. On some occasions, after the indictment, a warrant is issued for the arrest of the defendant. Arrest is a situation in which the police detain the person in a manner that, to any reasonable person, makes it clear that he or she is not free to leave. A person can be under arrest even though the police have not announced it, nor are handcuffs or physical restraints necessary. The National Practitioner Data Bank is a web-based repository of reports used as a workforce tool to enhance professional review efforts and prevent healthcare fraud and abuse, with the ultimate goal of protecting the public. You'd be surprised to know that the most commonly reported profession to the National Data Bank is actually nurses, not physicians. Health centers may query on all types of healthcare practitioners. So here in this slide, just to show you the criminal types of cases and parties and the burden of proof, verdict, and outcome. So the types of cases for criminal would be a misdemeanor or felony. Okay, felony is a serious crime such as murder, arson, or kidnapping. And misdemeanors are less serious, as we know that term. So the parties are the prosecution and defendants, of course. And the burden of proof is on the prosecutor, okay? And the verdict can happen in a trial, or it can be plead out. Plea bargaining can occur, and that's between the prosecutor and the defense attorney. The outcome can be the defense is guilty and receives a sentence, or the crime is a misdemeanor, and the sentence can be a fine or probation or some type of thing like that. Felonies carry a sentence of 1 or more years in prison and death. We're not going to get into death because that usually doesn't happen. In civil, as we've talked about and we'll go through in various spots in this program, that it's medical malpractice falls under this tort status. Okay, we talk about that. You have a plaintiff and a defendant. Okay, the burden of proof is on the plaintiff. The plaintiff must prove that their care was, the caregiver was negligent or created harm, and all those other things that we could talk about: duty, breach of duty, harm. Okay. Sometimes a case finishes before a jury hears the case due to a settlement or other reasons, but usually that's what lawyers try to get to. They want to settle the case. They do not want to go in front of a jury. And I say this in other programs that I've presented. And the plaintiff, if the plaintiff wins, they receive monetary compensation. Okay?
So we have the standard The standard of care is the same for civil and criminal, and that is the failure to do what similar professionals would be expected to do in like circumstances. However, there's a difference in the criminal is usually accompanied by intent. As a general conclusion regarding physicians, between 1990 and 1999, about 2,300 were convicted, which is about 4% of the total physicians in the U.S. at the time. This slide shows the main crimes that come up for physicians, but is a very simple list, actually. The sources listed in the reference section can give you a lot more information if you'd like to look at it. It's quite involved, and they segment down a lot of different areas that they, hone in on. So you might find that interesting. Nurses with criminal convictions accounted for approximately 10% of the disciplinary actions taken by state boards of nursing between 2003 and 2013. This was extracted from the nurses database, NURSYS. 4,260 nurses and 559 nurse applicants received a board action in 2012 and 2013 due to a criminal conviction. So gross negligence is not always criminal, we did mention that, but can be raised to that level. It's difficult to obtain statistics for these criminal convictions. I just named a little bit of it. And there's a lot of state board actions that can be found as well, if you want to look at that. So some of the terms I want to show you are homicide. And you're familiar with this. You watch TV and you've seen a lot of these shows. So it's when someone takes the life of another regardless of intent or other details surrounding the incident. So let's look at error management and lessons that are learned from aviation. And I've taught a lot about this in past years. So pilots and doctors operate in complex environments where teams interact with technology, and so do nurses. In both domains, risk varies from low to high, with threats coming from a variety of sources in the environment. Safety is paramount for both professions, but cost issues can influence the commitment of resources for safety efforts. We all know that. I used to teach classes in hospitals about how healthcare is similar to the airlines in its inherent risk and how to be aware of it and how to deal with it. I would illustrate several crashes and the causes, which were usually a series of mistakes or errors. So this was kind of fun for me to teach. I taught about, various crashes over the years and how silly, simple things in a series created that crash, resulted in that catastrophic event. And surveys in operating theaters have confirmed that pilots and doctors have common interpersonal problem areas and similarities in professional culture. And that was a lot of the literature that I ran upon when I was researching, the aviation, the comparison between aviation and medical care, that doctors are like the chiefs and they're the God syndrome, and that's what pilots had, and that's what when they investigated a lot of these cases that, a lot of the crashes, they found that was part of the problem. No one would question the pilot. And we know that, not so much these days, but years past, you'd never question the doctor. And that created errors many times. So most medical errors result from flawed systems, not reckless practitioners. And this is stated by the International Health Organization in 2022. And they're, in the past, they have as well. IHI is very well known. They're looking at safety and errors and mistakes. And I adopted that thinking, is that systems are mostly the cause of catastrophic results. And we see that in the aviation industry and other industries when things happen. You saw that with the Challenger disaster. It's a series of errors and system problems that they had. And when you have to analyze that and really look at it and make changes. So here is a video. I want to illustrate how errors and mistakes can occur in a hospital or any other healthcare facility, as well as in other industries. We will see this applied to an actual case shortly. And I've used this model. It's called the James Reason model to illustrate how an error occurs.
The Swiss cheese model. James Reason's Swiss cheese model is a simple metaphor to visualize how patient harm happens based on a systems approach. This metaphor shows us that in a complex healthcare system, errors are prevented by a series of defenses, barriers, and safeguards, represented by slices of cheese. Each slice acts as a defense against things going wrong. Ideally, all slices should remain intact, but each barrier has unintended weaknesses, or holes, which are inconsistent and are constantly opening, shutting, and moving. Hence the similarity with Swiss cheese. If an error occurs and breaks through a hole in one slice, it isn't a big problem. It doesn't usually result in a bad outcome. But sometimes the holes line up in multiple slices, meaning all the defense layers have been broken. When all holes are momentarily aligned, it brings hazards into contact with patients and causes them harm. The holes in the defenses arise for two reasons: active failures and latent conditions. Active failures are unsafe acts committed by people who are in direct contact with the patient or system. They take a variety of forms: slips, lapses, mistakes, and violations. Active failures have a direct and usually short-lived effect on the integrity of the defenses. Slips occur when a correct plan is made but is incorrectly executed. For example, you meant to drive to the airport but went into mental autopilot and took the route to work instead. Lapses occur when a step of the plan is omitted or forgotten. For example, you meant to set an alarm but forgot, so you overslept. Mistakes occur due to misinterpretation of relevant rules. For example, you interpreted your flight check-in time as 8 a.m. but arrived at the airport late. Violations occur when a person knows the rules but doesn't follow them, not with any intention to cause harm, but to save time or complete a priority task. For example, you were late for your flight and drove in excess of the speed limit. The police stopped you, resulting in a delay. Latent conditions are hidden in the design and working of the system, environment, or equipment. They may lie dormant in the system until they combine with an active failure to create an opportunity for harm to occur. Latent conditions can cause some of the opening and closing holes in defenses through ineffective training, inadequate supervision, ineffective communications, and inadequate staffing. Long-lasting holes in defenses can be caused by ineffective equipment, unworkable procedures, and poor design of devices, equipment, or supplies. The systems approach demonstrated by Reason's Swiss cheese model regards failure as an inevitable result of human systems and believes that countermeasures should be based on the idea that we cannot change the human condition, but we can change the conditions under which humans work.
So this case can be found all over the internet and has a lot of interest from several perspectives and is a highly debated case. Redonda Vout, a 38-year-old RN, was convicted of negligent homicide after making a fatal medication error and gross neglect of an impaired adult, resulting in his death in Tennessee in 2017. An order was written for Versed administration. When the nurse went into the Pyxis, she typed VE and the med came up as vecuronium. This was then administered. She worked at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. According to an investigation report filed in her court case, the nurse overlooked several warning signs and she withdrew the wrong drug, including that Versed is a liquid but vecuronium is a powder, and then injected the patient, Murphy, I don't know if it's Miss or Mr., and left the patient to be scanned via the MRI and the radiology suite. By the time the error was discovered, Murphy was brain dead and was taken off the life support the next day. Vout was acquitted of reckless homicide, but convicted of criminally negligent homicide, which is a lesser charge. Vanderbilt failed to report this to the Joint Commission and did not report it to the state or coroner that this was a med error. They terminated the nurse and reported her to the Board of Nursing. Very nice, right? The hospital deliberately obscured the actual error in its reporting and listed the death as natural. Vanderbilt had a settlement with the family. But an anonymous tip came in a year later that the hospital was not forthcoming as to the actual cause of death. The hospital was later sent a letter with corrections that had to be put in place, but the nurse was still left out in the cold. As a certified NAHQ quality specialist, I know that from one to many systems failures are usually the cause of such errors and catastrophic outcomes in healthcare. Here is a list of some of those failures in this case. So again, while she didn't set out to harm the patient, we through the review of this case, you can see multiple system events that compounded and led to the death of this patient. The dispensing machine delivered the wrong medication, and the override should have only been functional in the crisis situation and only for emergent specific drugs. The scanner tasked with identifying the right patient and drug were not available. That was great. Vout was multitasking, as all nurses do. She received an order to go to the ED and a PET scan, but should not have received both orders at the same time. The order for no monitoring was for when the patient was in the step-down unit, not the PET scan, but this was misinterpreted by the staff nurse who directed Vout. There was a lack of standardized processes for medication administration or checklists in the electronic medical record to help prevent this error. And the patient didn't undergo proper evaluation before the sedatives were administered. So to summarize the conclusion of this horrific case, the ANA and the TNA, Tennessee Nurses Association, stood by this nurse and supported her. This case is not a precedent, unfortunately. It's been going on for a long time with just not nurses, but pharmacists, physicians, and other healthcare personnel. In April of 2022, this nurse in North Carolina was charged with involuntary manslaughter in connection with the death of an inmate that occurred in 2019. A grand jury singled out Miss Huggins for indictment in the death of John Elliott Neville, 56, of Greensboro, even though she was attempting to save his life. Meanwhile, the grand jury brought no charges against 5 former detention center officers who had handcuffed Neville, kneeled on him, and held him in a prone position known to cause asphyxiation just before he died. Based on reading information about this case, these charges are absurd. She was attempting to help the inmate, which was depicted on many body cam videos. So you can take a look at this case as well. Here is the actual news report of this case.
A grand jury indicted just one of the 6 people accused in John Neville's death. Neville died in 2019 while in custody at the Forsyth County Jail. A nurse and 5 detention officers were initially charged. WFOY News 2's Marissa Tansino spoke with Neville's son, who says he's disappointed about the outcome. Well, Lauren, just over 2 years since John Neville died, a grand jury decided to indict just one of the 6 people charged in that case. It has been a long road for Neville's family. His son, Sean, told me he can't understand why the jury made this call.
A little confused, dismayed, just because of the sheer, I guess, volume of evidence that there is. There's the video, there's the coroner's report. 1 nurse, 5 detention officers, and 1 indictment. A grand jury made the decision to formally charge Michelle Huggins earlier this week after John Neville died while in custody of the Forsyth County Jail back in December of 2019. There's all of these pieces that clearly show that, everybody was involved in his death, not just the nurse. And so it's difficult to see how they could come to the decision to indict one and not everybody. The moments leading to Neville's death all captured on body camera video. Those images seared into the mind of his son, Sean. No, I'll never forget. That was the last time we saw him alive. Those were those words you heard in the video were the last time we ever heard his voice. So those images, they just stick because that's the last time that we ever saw any signs of life.
Sean filed a civil suit last year. He says they're still pursuing that and hopes to remind everyone his father's life had value. Since the initial charges came down in 2020, Forsyth County Sheriff Bobby Kimbrough banned the bent leg prone restraint, a tactic jail staff used on Neville before he died.
So that case is pretty dramatic. We all don't know the information on it. I don't have grand jury testimony or any testimony as to a trial or anything. So I don't really know. But to me, it looks like when the other correction officers don't get the same indictment, it just seems odd that the nurse would be singled out. It just seems odd. So it's just, again, another case that you might want to look up. This one happened in Pennsylvania, and this was very high profile. Prosecutors contend the 84-year-old McMaster fell and struck his head in April 2018, just days after arriving at the Cathedral Village Senior Living Facility in Philadelphia. He died hours later as the result of bleeding in his brain. And the resident here is the patient of the father of H.R. McMaster's the former National Security Advisor and Vietnam general. And this apparently the senior McMaster was in the facility 5 days and fell 4 times. So that's a problem. Okay, here's the actual news broadcast of this case as well.
H.R. McMaster Sr.'s senior living community is now facing involuntary manslaughter charges. The Pennsylvania Attorney General says if she had done her job, she could have saved that man's life. Action News reporter Maggie Camp live in Center City this afternoon. And Maggie, the nurse is facing a number of allegations here.
And some of those felony charges, Brian, 4 days after entering Cathedral Village, H.R. McMaster Sr. died from head trauma after suffering a fall. The Attorney General now charging a nurse that he says failed to follow protocol.
Gainey could have saved Mr. McMaster's life had she simply done her job.
State Attorney General Josh Shapiro speaking about 30-year-old nurse Kristen Gainey, now facing felony neglect, involuntary manslaughter, and charges for falsifying medical records. Gainey was a contracted nurse tasked with monitoring H.R. McMaster Sr. at Cathedral Village Skilled Nursing in Roxborough. Shapiro says on the night of April 12th, McMaster, father of President Trump's former national security advisor, fell and hit his head. He says during that time, McMaster was placed in the hallway and left to sit in a wheelchair for 7 hours. June Mohammed, a nurse's aide who has since quit, was there that night. She questioned Gainey about the protocol, which says a patient should be getting neurological checks every 15 minutes after a fall.
She didn't take the matter serious. She didn't do anything about it. Nothing was done for her, no vitals, no nothing.
Mr. McMaster sat in the lobby without a single assessment until his death at 7 a.m.
Gainey allegedly tried to cover her tracks by filling out neurological forms, even one stating she checked on McMaster's vitals with a timestamp 1 hour after he died. Authorities say surveillance footage made the case clear.
Gainey falsified all of those neurological checks, not just the last one after McMaster's death.
Now, the state health department is also investigating Cathedral Village, the McMaster family hiring their own representation, who is now looking into a civil case as well.
Okay, very dramatic. There were several criminal cases after Katrina in 2005 in the healthcare area. As we all know, this was just horrible, as we all recall, with patients being trapped in several nursing homes. Many could not be saved. The Attorney General charged 3 nurses and a physician with euthanasia. And I actually remember this story on 60 Minutes. It was a big story at the time. Some were acquitted and some were not. And we see here, charges were dropped for nurses in return for testimony. So you got to make deals, I guess. You know, you have to do what you have to do. Okay, in this case, the NICU was stocked incorrectly with adult dose heparin. Okay, we know that that's done by the pharmacist. They stock the medications. 6 different nurses administered the adult dose to 5 infants, and 3 of them died. They were not charged, and this had to do with how the organization responded, which was to report properly, tell the family right away as to the mistake, cooperate with authorities, and support the nurse. So that's a good story. Here's another case from 2006. The patient, Beatrice Vance, came into the ER with signs of an MI, but sat and waited in the ER. By the time she was seen, she was unconscious and died. This delay in treatment and subsequent death was determined by the coroner to be a homicide. So here's another very dramatic clip for you to see.
Michael Bragg claiming he took inappropriate pictures and videos of patients and on at least one occasion violated an unconscious person. Now, Bragg is currently in Franklin County Prison on 31 counts related to child pornography. He's accused of secretly videoing neighborhood children using the bathroom. And at that time, police also found recorded videos of patients in the emergency room at a Carlisle hospital in various states of undress. And that is, again, where Bragg worked. Now, we're told the 394 new charges stem from those videos. According to court paperwork, the offenses happened in 2016. UPMC released a statement saying, quote, "We understand that patients, their families, and the community feel shocked, upset, and concerned, and we share these feelings. We are deeply disturbed and saddened that someone could be responsible for actions that are in stark contrast to our mission and core values." UPMC says Bragg passed all necessary background checks. We have also learned UPMC Carlisle is providing counseling services at no cost for victims and their families. There are still a lot of unanswered questions on these new charges. How many victims? Were they all patients? We expect to learn more tomorrow.
Hi, my name is Robert Shelley, and I'm an attorney that helps nurses navigate Arizona Board of Nursing investigations without having to go through it alone. One question I get frequently is, if I am charged with a crime, what type of charges do I have to report to the board? The short rule is any healthcare provider in Arizona must report to their licensing board within 10 business days of any charge that may affect patient safety. And kind of each board keeps their own list of what they would consider crime that affects patient safety. The Arizona Board of Nursing actually lists on their website the crimes that they feel need to be reported. It's an extensive list. It pretty much covers any possible crime. Not every single one, but the vast majority of them. Any kind of substance abuse related incident, DUIs, drug possession, theft, assault, disorderly conduct, domestic violence. I mean, those are like kind of the normal crimes that most nurses have to deal with. Obviously anything kind of, more severe than that need to be reported as well. But if you are wondering whether you need to report your crime, I'd go on the website, take a look at the list, and then if you have more questions, then give my firm a call and we can walk you through what you absolutely do or do not need to report to the board. We have a link to a cheat sheet listed down below. You can download, it has a little more information, and appreciate you watching the video.
So, have we all been driven to distraction in our staff nurse jobs? Of course we have, especially during MedPass. Here are a few areas that cause distractions and getting off task. Interruptions during MedPass is a high one. Distractions which result in mistakes and severe injuries and even death have occurred in the OR during surgery, ERs, and in any other hospital area where tasks for healthcare are being done and they're a little more critical or specialized. So it was found in this particular study, there's many of them, that simply, some informational displays or computer-mediated communication can help prevent such errors, interruptions, and things. So I know one example that many of us are familiar with are the med nurse wearing a vest that says quiet or don't interrupt or zero interruptions, and you put the line through it. And that really does free up the nurse that she wouldn't have to worry about being approached by family members, physicians, ancillary staff, whoever. It's usually families are walking up to them. So that can really cut down on errors. Of course, if you're the only nurse on the floor, it makes it a little difficult. So that's another issue. So when does human error become criminal? As you saw in the previous film clips, it has a level of intent, okay? We saw that where there's intent, no intent. And you can still have homicide and involuntary manslaughter without intent, as we can see. It depends on what the prosecutor's office wants to do and the coroner. So we're going to talk about hindsight bias and a couple of other concepts. And this can happen as we as humans look back and try to blame without knowing all the facts, nor seeking to investigate systematic factors. We tend to do that, right? We can think of that now in our mind and think of knee-jerk. We want to blame somebody for something that happens. Or somebody that does that, maybe your husband or your friend. They're quick to blame. We all look back at an adverse event and see all the problems with it, but we don't think to consider the situation at the time or put ourselves in those shoes, right? Inattentional blindness means that you are looking at something but don't see it. Confirmation bias is seeking information or opinions that supports ideas or preconceived notions and ignoring information that is contrary to preconceived ideas. And we see this all the time when we deal with news, right? We want it to fit what we think. And that's some of the issues we're going on in the country right now. And we saw earlier what latent system failures are, and those are just failures that just multiply and keep continuing very quietly, like not active, but behind the scenes as a system where they just keep, like a straight arrow, straight line through a cheese, right? As we discussed. A just culture means that staff should be encouraged to come forward with a near miss or error without fear or termination or discipline. I wonder how many facilities have a true just culture these days. It's hard to have this when the knee-jerk action by most leaders is to punish. Here is part of the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, the IHI, position on this topic. And it states that most medical errors result from flawed systems and not reckless practitioners. And you need to improve and analyze systems, and you want to be proactive and not reactive, if at all possible. That's what they espouse. Criminalizing medical error creates environment and cultures of fear and blame, and it's counterproductive. So you want to have an environment that has transparency, openness, honesty, accountability as well. We want accountability, but you want to have all these other things present as well. So as you can see, all of this is way beyond the facility getting sued in civil court. That can happen along with criminal charges, which is tragic. It is essential to look at the facility and its practices in the area of RCA, FMEA, which is failure mode effect analysis, and systems. Obviously, administration and corporate should look at systems, near misses, minimize distractions of critical actions, have a proper path for reporting, provide safety and privacy, and support the involved staff. Keeping it private, not that it should get all around the building. And I worked with much of this as a quality executive in a New York hospital a few years ago. And this has become more mainstream currently, and it's a good thing. So we have root cause analysis, which is more reactive. You're looking back at a problem as a team. And there's a whole format for that I'm sure you're familiar with it in one way or the other. And failure mode effect analysis, it tries to anticipate problems and design systems to prevent that adverse outcome, and it's proactive. You're looking ahead, seeing what are our processes and what's critical, what should we examine. So a just culture does not mean that no one is accountable. It means that institutions should examine systems and break them down with a team. I did this many times as administrator in both hospitals and long-term care facilities. And it's amazing what I found out by doing this analysis. If I hadn't done it, I would have been blaming the wrong thing and nothing would have been fixed. And that error would have likely have reoccurred. And I just want to mention here, a mention of having your own insurance. I get this question from time to time. And yes, you should have your own insurance. I know it's back and forth 50-50 sometimes, but even bad nursing, board of nursing interviews are an adversarial process. They're not bad interviews, they're board of nursing interviews, and they're adversarial. So you really should have your insurance, obtain legal counsel, even for that. Okay, so we who make mistakes still have to deal with negligence allegations, whether it be civil or criminal. So we mainly deal with, we're familiar with the civil negligence. You know, somebody fell down and someone's going to get blamed, right? Criminal, again, this is a webinar on that other level of negligence, okay? And listed here are a few areas they're interesting for LNCs to get involved with. If we have LNCs in the audience, as you can see, this is a distressing but interesting area for LNCs to be involved with actively. And although I haven't had many of these cases, I've had a few, and it can be a large area for prospective LNCs in both assisting defense attorneys and prosecutors. So although distressing, that can be a very interesting line of work, as I mentioned. There are several people that just devote themselves to this type of work. They work with just criminal attorneys, okay, either for defense or prosecutors. Okay, so there's information on the Six Figure Legal Nurse website, and there's also another free webinar if you go on there as well. So let's do a little quiz before we end, okay? So what situation in healthcare might lead to fraud claims? A, the healthcare provider missed work 4 days due to the flu. B, the provider performed a procedure on a patient with their consent. C, the provider ignored the billing statutes by listing procedures that were not performed. D, the provider gave advice to the patient and family regarding healthcare options. So what do you think? C, the provider ignored the billing statutes by listing procedures that were not performed. Big thing, okay? In criminal law is fraud, healthcare fraud. In most jurisdictions or states, a nurse or other must report a criminal act to the Board of Nursing as well as to other agencies. True or false? That's pretty easy, 50-50, right? You must, some states, and most of them do, you must report any kind of criminal or accusation or even some incidents that occur in facilities. You must report them to the Board of Nursing. There's our statutes concerning that in certain states. So you might want to look at that in your own state. Which of the following are considered criminal acts against the patient in a healthcare facility? Inappropriate relationships with patients, including sexual misconduct. 2, or B, obtaining insurance pre-certification for procedures to be performed. Billing and coding for charges for care delivered. Taking kickbacks from pharmaceutical salesmen to use their products. So this question has to do, it's asking about crimes against a patient. So that would be A, or 1. Okay, inappropriate relationships. Certainly number 4 is a crime. You can be, I worked with a person in a hospital who got caught doing that and ended up in jail, actually. A felony is A, punishment with a fine. B, a sentence that can be from 1 year or more in prison. C, driving under the influence. B is the answer. Okay, certainly driving under the influence wouldn't be a felony, but if the person hit someone and killed them or harmed them, that could be a criminal act, and usually it is these days. The Swiss cheese model shows us why staff need to have more education. B, how errors can occur with multiple points that converge. C, how RCA can assist in ensuring safety. The answer is obviously B, okay? It's how errors occur, and it demonstrates how they converge, and they all happen at the perfect times, like the perfect storm. So I thought that was a really good illustration. One of the cases presented that involves systemic failures resulting in a devastating outcome is the Huggins case, the Gainey case, the Vout case, the Johnson case. Okay, so Huggins was the correctional case, and I think that was unwarranted in her case, in my opinion. Gainey was the McMaster case, where she purposely ignored the patient after a critical fall and documented fraudulently. The Vout case is the answer. Look this one up, as there's so much information on this regarding many organizations who are protesting her sentence to this day, and even the fact that she was even criminally charged. It really makes you think. There was no intent in this case. A modality that healthcare organizations can use to put in place a plan to prevent incidents of high risk is known as root cause analysis, just culture, failure mode effect analysis, or 1 and 3. So the active word here is prevent. So the answer is failure mode effect analysis. We discussed that. This was first initiated and developed by NASA and the airline industry many years ago, and can be easily applied to healthcare. Root cause analysis looks back to why an incident occurred, which is valuable, of course, and most organizations do this process. A just culture is an organization's value. It may or may not be present. So think about that for your organization. One of the highest errors or incidents that occurs overall is pressure injuries, falls, medication administration, or restraint use. The answer is medication errors. Although the others do occur in all types of facilities and services, medications have the great potential for the greatest harm, as the statistics show. So I hope this quiz section helped you reflect on what you learned through this webinar. There are so many questions I could pose, but this gives you a little reminder of some points presented. Before this webinar, you probably never thought of the criminal aspects of nursing that can easily happen to any nurse. So don't be afraid. Be aware. So thank you for attending. Find me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and also YouTube. And please email me any questions or comments. And thank you again.